In the car parks of English hospitals, on the edges of motorway service stations, in the forgotten corners of school playgrounds and corporate office compounds, something strange is happening. Teams of volunteers are arriving with bare root saplings bundled in plastic bags, bags of wood chip, and wheelbarrows full of compost. They are not landscapers. They are not council contractors. Many of them have never planted a tree in their lives, and within 2 or 3 hours they are gone, leaving behind a patch of ground roughly the size of a tennis court covered in what looks, frankly, like a mess. A dense tangle of 200 or 300 young trees crammed together at planting densities that would make any conventional forester wince. No neat rows, no spacing guides, just a dense mulch layer, a chaotic jumble of mixed native species, and a small sign that reads something like Tiny Forest, planted using the Miyawaki method. Within 3 years, that mess is shoulder height. Within 5, it is above your head. Within 10, it has become something that ecologists are struggling to find adequate language for. It is not a woodland in any conventional sense. It is not a park. It is something denser, darker, and stranger. A place where the canopy closes so fast that the ground beneath goes dark within a few growing seasons, cutting off weeds, building leaf litter, pulling in insects, and then birds, and then small mammals. On a patch of land smaller than a tennis court in the middle of a city, something that took nature decades to approximate is arriving in years. To understand why this is working, you first have to understand why it should not be. Britain has been trying to plant trees for decades. The Woodland Trust has run campaigns. Local councils have committed to urban greening targets. Corporations have funded tree planting as part of carbon offset programs. And the results have been, to put it diplomatically, uneven. Saplings planted on road verges die in the first drought. Community orchards fail to establish. Large-scale upland planting schemes produce monoculture rows of Sitka spruce that ecologists compare, not entirely jokingly, to green concrete. The country has some of the lowest forest cover of any nation in Europe, just under 13%, and decades of well-intentioned planting have barely moved that number. The problem, as with so many things, is not effort. It is method. Most conventional tree planting starts from a set of assumptions. Trees need space. They compete with each other for light and water. You plant them at wide intervals and manage them over decades to thin out weaker specimens and let the strongest reach their potential. This is how commercial forestry works. This is how parkland works. This is how almost every tree planting scheme in Britain has worked for the last 100 years. And on that logic, planting hundreds of trees in an area the size of a car parking space is not ambitious. It is suicidal. Akira Miyawaki did not think like a forester, he thought like an ecologist. Miyawaki was a Japanese botanist who spent decades studying what he called potential natural vegetation, the plant communities that would naturally occupy a given piece of land if humans stepped aside and let succession run its course. In Japan, where human activity has transformed almost every landscape, he became fascinated by one exception: the tiny patches of ancient forest that surrounded Shinto shrines. These shrine forests, called Chinju no Mori, had been protected for centuries. They were not managed. They were not thinned. They were simply left alone. And they were different in character from every other piece of Japanese forest: denser, more structurally complex, more species-rich, and remarkably resilient to the typhoons and floods and industrial pollution that surrounded them. Miyawaki spent years analyzing the composition of these shrine forests, cataloging what species grew where and which structural layers were present in healthy examples. He then asked a question that sounds obvious in retrospect, but that nobody had really asked before. What if you stopped waiting for nature to build those communities and instead built them from the start? What if you planted not one species, but 15 or 20, not in rows, but randomly, not spaced apart, but packed together, mimicking the structural complexity of a mature forest right from day one? The first obstacle he encountered was the same one facing every tree planter in Britain today: the soil. Industrial and urban soils are not like woodland soils. They are compacted by machinery and foot traffic. They are stripped of the organic matter that gives healthy soil its structure. Water hits them and runs off. Air cannot penetrate. Roots find no purchase. You can plant the most perfectly selected native sapling into compacted urban soil, and it will sit there, alive but inert, for years. This is why so many urban tree planting efforts fail. The problem is not above ground, it is underground. Miyawaki's method addresses the soil before it addresses the trees. The preparation phase is intensive and, to anyone watching, looks completely disproportionate to the size of the planting area. The ground is broken up to a depth of nearly a meter. Compost, wood chip, and other organic material are worked in to change the texture and biology of the soil, introducing the microbial communities that healthy forest soil depends on. Mycorrhizal fungi, the underground networks that link tree roots and allow them to share nutrients and chemical signals, are present in these amendments. The soil preparation is not gardening, it is ecosystem construction. Then comes the planting, and this is where Miyawaki's method looks most radical to Western eyes. 3 to 5 saplings per square meter, species chosen to replicate the layers of a natural forest. Pioneer species that grow fast and provide early structure. Canopy species that will eventually dominate. Understory trees that prefer shade. Every plant is a native species specifically selected for the local climate and soil type. And once they go in packed so tightly that they are almost touching. The logic runs counter to everything conventional horticulture teaches, but it is precise. Competition, the thing conventional forestry tries to manage away, is the engine of the Miyawaki method. When trees are packed tightly, they compete for light. They grow upward faster. They self-thin naturally, with weaker individuals dying and returning their nutrients to the soil, while stronger ones race for the canopy. Then, for 2 years, the site is watered and weeded. After that, nothing. No maintenance, no management, no thinning programs. The forest is abandoned to itself, and that abandonment is part of the design. A Miyawaki forest is not a garden that needs tending. It is a system that, once established, runs on its own logic. In Japan, Miyawaki used this method to restore industrial wasteland along coastal areas, to green factory campuses, to rebuild forest cover on land that had been stripped by landslides. He planted over 40 million trees across the world in his lifetime. But the method stayed largely within specialist ecological circles until the late 2010s, when a Belgian entrepreneur named Shubhendu Sharma, who had seen Miyawaki work on a Toyota factory site in India, began systematizing the approach and promoting it globally. And it was through that network that the method began arriving in British car parks and school playgrounds in earnest. Earthwatch Europe, the conservation organization, has been leading what they call the Tiny Forest Project in Britain, and the numbers are starting to accumulate in ways that are difficult to dismiss. They have planted dozens of sites across England, from Manchester to Oxford to the Thames estuary. Ecologists monitoring those sites are recording things that, in the context of British urban nature, are genuinely surprising. A site in Oxfordshire, planted on former agricultural land, recorded over 1,000 individual invertebrates in a single survey session within 4 years of planting. A site in Southend-on-Sea began attracting breeding birds within 3 years. Soil carbon measurements at established sites show accumulation rates several times higher than conventionally planted woodland. Air temperature measurements inside the canopy on summer days show differences of several degrees compared to surrounding urban surfaces. But the numbers that tell the most important story are the ones about what Britain has actually lost. 97% of ancient woodland has been destroyed or degraded since the Second World War. Ancient woodland, the ecologically complex, species-rich forest that took centuries to develop, cannot be recreated. What the Miyawaki method is not claiming to do, and this matters, is recreate ancient woodland. What it claims to do is something more modest and more achievable. It claims to create biodiverse green infrastructure fast, on small sites, in degraded urban conditions, and at a cost that local councils and businesses can actually afford. The cost dimension is where the argument gets genuinely interesting. A conventional park costs money to maintain forever. Mowing, pruning, weed control, replanting, ground staff. A Miyawaki forest, after 2 years of establishment care, costs almost nothing to maintain. The system maintains itself. For cash-strapped councils trying to meet urban greening targets without ongoing maintenance budgets, this is not a trivial advantage. There's a criticism, and it deserves fair treatment. Some ecologists argue that Miyawaki forests, however impressive for their speed and density, are not really forests in any ecologically meaningful sense. They lack the structural diversity of age that natural forests develop over centuries. They do not have standing dead wood, fallen nurse logs, the deep time complexity that makes ancient woodland what it is. They can also reflect a top-down, controlled approach to nature restoration that sits uncomfortably with the rewilding philosophy, gaining ground in British conservation. These are legitimate tensions, but the people planting Miyawaki forest in British cities are not, for the most part, arguing with the rewilders. They're pointing at the car park, the motorway verge, the schoolyard of tarmac and compacted clay, and asking a more immediate question. This land is not going to rewild naturally. The ecological conditions for natural succession are not present. The seed sources are gone, the soil is broken. If we do nothing, this stays a car park. What should we do with it? The answer coming back from the monitoring data is increasingly clear. You dig up the car park, you rebuild the soil, you pack it with natives, you walk away, and within a decade, something is living there that was not living there before. Something that cools the air, holds water, builds carbon, feeds insects, shelters birds, and does all of that without a maintenance crew or a management plan. Something that grows, in the ecological language of Miyawaki's method, 10 times faster than conventional planting. The people who laugh at the tiny forests, at the idea that you can pack 300 trees into a space the size of a tennis court and expect anything meaningful to happen, are making the same mistake that was made in Ethiopia when the villagers started digging trenches instead of planting seedlings. They are looking at the method instead of the mechanism. They are seeing what it looks like rather than understanding what it does. Because what Miyawaki forests do, in the end, is very simple. They change the rules of the game. They do not ask degraded land to support trees. They change the land first, and then the trees follow. What his method acknowledges, and what makes it radical, is that we have destroyed so much of that baseline that not interfering is no longer sufficient. We have broken the system badly enough that we have to rebuild it deliberately before we can leave it alone. You have to fix the soil before you can plant the tree. You have to plant the forest before you can have the woodland. In car parks and school playgrounds across England, that work is happening right now. It looks small. It looks unglamorous. It looks to anyone driving past like a patch of scrub that nobody has got around to tidying yet. But the monitoring data is accumulating. The species lists are growing longer. The soil carbon is rising. The microclimate measurements are showing up in urban planning documents, and somewhere under the mulch in the biology of deliberately constructed soil, in the competition between saplings, fighting for light in spaces too small for any of them to grow conventionally, something is building itself that is already demonstrably more alive than what was there before. If you want to see more stories about the people and places quietly changing how we think about land, nature, and the systems we depend on, subscribe and leave a comment below telling me which ecosystem story you think deserves the next deep dive.